The scream was so sharp and sudden that it didn't sound human at first. It sounded like the idea of a man being hurt, like pain had taken the shortest route out of a body and gone straight into the walls. Every door along the second-floor corridor stayed shut for a stunned beat. Then boots hit the floorboards, bare feet slapped stone, someone knocked a lamp off a table in the dark, and the castle, Zustadt, old and sprawling, winter quiet in southern Poland, filled with the frantic noise of men who had all been laughing an hour ago. They ran toward the one door at the end of the hall, the one Anton Holberg had locked from the inside. They reached it at the same moment, shoulders colliding, breath steaming in the cold air. Someone tried the handle. It didn't move. Another man put his ear to the wood, listening, expecting to hear Anton swearing, laughing, staging the joke back at them. Anything would have been relief, but there was nothing. No groan, no footsteps, no drunken mumbling. Just a silence so complete, it felt like the room was holding its breath. A voice, thin, terrified, said, "Anton, open it." They all heard how childish it sounded. Someone pounded on the door hard enough to sting his palm. "Anton, enough! Open it!" The lock stayed firm. And that was the moment the dare stopped being a dare. Because they remembered all at once the little things they'd dismissed earlier. The old staff's reluctance to speak about that room. The way Anton's smile had tightened whenever the story came up. The heavy creak they'd heard above the sitting room, so pronounced that even drunk men had gone silent. One of them, no one later wanted to claim the thought, whispered, "What if he can't?" They didn't say ghost. Not yet. They didn't say monk. They just stared at the locked door, at the keyhole, at the truth they'd made unavoidable. Anton was on the other side, alone, with no way out except that door, and a scream had just come through it. Someone stepped back, drew a breath, and threw his shoulder into the wood. The impact boomed down the hallway. Dust sifted from the ceiling. The door rattled but held. Again, harder, again. With each blow, the men grew quieter, as if their bodies understood that the sound they were making was not rescue, but violence, and violence has consequences. On the final hit, the hinges gave with a cracking tear. The door lurched inward, half swinging, half falling, and the men surged into the room with the lamp held high. What they saw stopped them like a hand to the chest. Anton Holberg lay on the bed on his back, fully dressed, his face turned slightly toward the ceiling, as if he'd been listening for something. His mouth was open a fraction, not in a theatrical grimace, but in the slack, unfinished way. Death leaves a person when it arrives fast. And around his throat was a thin red ring, a ligature mark, precise and narrow, like a cord had been pulled tight. But there was no cord, no rope, no torn sheet, no wire, nothing knotted to the bed frame, no sign of a struggle, no overturned furniture, no frantic claw marks on the door, just Anton, locked inside, dead. The kind of scene that makes every man in the room think the same thought, in the same order. This can't be real. And then, if it's real, what did we do? Hours earlier, the same corridor had been full of laughter. It was late in the winter of 1933, the kind of night where the cold sits on the castle like a second roof. Zustadt Castle, old world and overbuilt, a place that seemed to exist to remind you of family lines and inherited power, held its warmth only where fire had recently lived. Elsewhere, the air stayed sharp, dry, and faintly metallic, like stone that has never truly forgotten snow. Anton Holberg was young for an owner, young enough that he still moved through the place with a boyish pride, as if the castle were not responsibility, but proof. When he entertained, he did it like a man trying to become the version of himself that the portraits demanded. That night, he had friends over, men from the region, men who understood the unspoken rules of class and camaraderie, men who knew how to drink until the world softened without fully losing themselves. They had been at it for hours. Cards, drink, jokes that grew louder as the room grew warmer. One of Anton's sitting rooms, he had many, held them in a circle of lamplight. Thick rugs muffled footsteps. Dark wood swallowed shadows. The fire was low but steady, throwing a mild orange glow across the table and the faces above it. Anton poured another round. He did it with the showy concentration of a drunk host trying to prove he was still competent. He carried the glasses carefully at first, then less carefully, then not carefully at all. Somewhere between the sideboard and the table, his boot caught the rug, and the whole proud performance collapsed into clumsy comedy. Half the drink splashed onto the carpet. Anton went down on one knee, blinking at the mess, as if he couldn't quite convince his eyes to focus. Then he laughed, loud, unbothered, inviting everyone else to laugh with him instead of at him. They obliged. The room roared, men slapped the table, wiped tears from their eyes, called him names that were affectionate and cruel in the same breath. Anton gathered the nearly empty glasses, still chuckling, and, rather than refill them, walked back to the table and handed them out like a joke. The joke landed. The laughter rolled on. No one stood up to get more. The cards mattered more than the drink now. The momentum mattered more than sense. A friend at the head of the table began dealing, the soft, papery slide of cards sounding almost gentle under the noise. Then the creak came from above them. It was loud enough to cut through drunken laughter. Not the casual settling of an old building, not a soft complaint of wood. This was a long, deliberate groan, like weight shifting across floorboards. The room quieted in the way a room quiets when everybody hears the same thing and tries to pretend it didn't. Heads tilted upward. Hands hovered over cards. The fire popped once. Anton's smile stayed, but it tightened at the corners. He made a small gesture toward the ceiling, as if waving away a bothersome fly, and said lightly, "Oh, that's the monk." Most of the men had heard him say it before. Anton liked telling the story. It made his castle sound older than it was in the minds of his guests, and it made him sound like a man who lived close to folklore and danger, even if only as a storyteller. But there was someone at the table who hadn't heard it. The newer acquaintance, the outsider by half a degree, who didn't yet know which jokes were safe and which ones were not. "The monk?" he said. "What monk?" A few of the men groaned, already tired. Someone rolled his eyes. Someone else muttered, "Not this again." Anton, drunk and pleased with himself, leaned into it. He lowered his voice, just enough to shift the mood, and told the version of the tale he always told first, the one that made him sound cautious rather than superstitious. When Anton took ownership of Zustadt Castle, he said, the staff warned him there was one bedroom upstairs that was off limits, not because it was unsafe structurally, not because it was used for storage, but because it was haunted. A hooded monk, they claimed, patrolled the room. Malevolent, Anton said. Not a gentle ghost, not a sad remnant, but something that did not want the living in that space. Anton admitted he had never gone inside. He said it like a joke, but the new man at the table heard something else in it. He laughed sharply. "You own a castle," he said, incredulous. "And there's a room in it you won't enter because someone told you a ghost lives there?" Anton's friends, sensing blood in the water, seized on the simplest pleasure a group can share, making one of their own squirm. They piled on. Anton, really? You've never even opened it? That's your castle. Come on. Don't tell me you're afraid of a bedtime story. Anton tried to steer them back to cards. He waved his hand, smiled too hard, said, "It's nothing. It's just, let's play." But pride is a tender thing, and drunken pride is the easiest thing in the world to bruise. The new man, still laughing, leaned forward and said the words that turned teasing into a trap. "Prove it," he said. "Go in there tonight." There was a pause. Not because it was too much, but because it was exactly enough. A dare shaped perfectly. Refuse and you are a coward. Accept, and you become the hero of the table. Someone else added, half joking, half serious, "Better yet, sleep in there. Spend the night, then we'll all shut up." Anton laughed as if he found it ridiculous. He tried to make the laugh sound confident. But his eyes flicked once toward the ceiling. The creak above them came again, softer this time, like a foot shifting. Anton's face did something small and involuntary. It was not terror. It was worse than terror. It was hesitation. And hesitation to men like these was blood. "Fine," Anton said, the word coming out too quickly. "Fine. I'll do it. I'll sleep in the room. It's nothing." Cheers rose around the table, as if they'd won something. The men laughed and slapped him on the shoulder, and the dare became a shared story before it had even happened. Anton told himself, like a man bargaining with his own fear, that they'd forget, that they were drunk, that by the time the night faded, the idea would fade with it. They didn't forget. At the end of the evening, when the fire was low and the air in the sitting room had started to cool, the men stood together with new purpose, like a small drunken jury. "All right," one said. "Up we go." Another grinned. "No excuses now." Anton rose, his legs were unsteady. The drink had made him brave enough to agree, but it had not made him any steadier in his body. Still, he led them out of the sitting room because he had to. The castle was his. The humiliation would be his. They climbed the stairs, their footsteps echoing along stone. The higher they went, the colder it became. The warmth of the sitting room felt suddenly far away, as if it belonged to a different building entirely. The second-floor hallway stretched ahead in dim lamplight, doors lining it like closed mouths. They stopped at the off-limits bedroom. The door was plain, but it looked older than the others, more handled by time than by people. Dust gathered at its edges in a soft seam. Anton had the key. He slid it into the lock and turned. The mechanism clicked reluctantly, as if it had not been asked to do this in a long time. He paused with his hand on the handle. He turned his head, looking at his friends as if expecting one of them, any of them, to step in and say, "Enough." No one did. They watched him with the bright-eyed cruelty of men who wanted the story more than they wanted his comfort. Anton opened the door. The smell came first. Stale air, old cloth, dust that had been undisturbed. The lamplight from the corridor spilled into the room and found cobwebs and heavy furniture, an old bed frame, a wardrobe, a chair with carved arms. It did not look like a haunted chamber. It looked like neglect. That should have been a relief. Yet Anton's shoulders remained tense, his posture too straight. "Go on," someone said softly, as if they were suddenly aware of how quiet the corridor was. Anton forced a smile. "Good night, gentlemen," he said with a flourish he didn't feel. He stepped inside. Behind him he heard the men shift, heard their breath, felt the moment closing like a hand. He turned back and closed the door, then, because he wanted control, because he wanted to prevent them from barging in later to frighten him for fun, he turned the key. The lock clicked. Several of the men would later remember that sound with painful clarity, because it made everything afterward feel final. Anton was sealed inside. The men lingered for a heartbeat in the corridor, their laughter suddenly thinner. Someone muttered, "He'll be fine." Someone else, the new man, scoffed again as if insisting on disbelief could protect him from regret. They went back to their rooms. The castle gradually returned to quiet. Anton lay on the bed fully dressed because he couldn't bring himself to perform the intimacy of undressing in a room that felt borrowed. He stared at the ceiling, listening to the building settle, telling himself the whole thing was childish. The danger of stories is that you don't need to believe them for them to work. You only need to keep them in your mind. Anton had kept this one there for years, told it at dinners, joked about it with guests, repeated it to make his castle seem more fascinating. He had made the monk reel in his own mouth. Now, alone, with winter pressing against the windows, he could not stop seeing the hood. He closed his eyes and tried to sleep. A creak came from somewhere in the room. Not from above, not from the hallway, from inside. Anton opened his eyes. The darkness was thick, broken only by the faintest gray light from the window. The wardrobe stood like a tall, watchful shape. The chair in the corner looked like something crouched. He listened, holding his breath. Silence. He told himself it was old wood. Buildings creak. That's what buildings do. He closed his eyes again. And then he felt pressure at his throat. Not crushing, not yet, just present. Narrow and precise, like the first touch of a cord pulled into place. Anton's eyes snapped open. His hand flew to his neck. There was nothing there. He swallowed. It didn't feel right. Panic arrived as a cold bloom in his chest. He sat up, breathing hard, and the pressure eased as if it had never existed. For a moment, he hated himself. He wanted to laugh at himself. He wanted to be able to tell the men in the morning that the only thing haunting that room was dust. He rose and went to the door, putting his hand on the lock. He could leave. He could unlock it and walk to his own bedroom and call it a joke. Pride would sting, but he would live. He stood there with his hand on the key, and in his mind he saw their faces, smiling, waiting, ready to tell the story of Anton Holberg, the coward. He stepped away from the door. He returned to the bed. He lay down rigid, telling himself he would outlast the fear. Time passed strangely, warped by drink and adrenaline. He drifted toward sleep and surfaced again, each time convinced he had heard something. A soft shift, a breath, the faintest scrape of cloth. And then the pressure returned, stronger, more certain. A narrow band drawing tight around his neck. Anton's hands clawed at his collar, at empty air, at nothing. His body jerked upright. He tried to shout, but sound has to pass through a throat, and his throat was being taken from him. What came out was a scream, high, raw, involuntary. It tore through the castle and down the hallway, and into the rooms where his friends slept. Then the scream cut off. Silence fell behind it, heavy as snow. The men woke, ran, reached the locked door, pounded, shouted his name. No response. They forced entry the only way they could, and found Anton Holberg dead on the bed with a thin red ligature mark around his throat. No rope in sight, no sign of struggle. No explanation that satisfied the eyes and hands of men who had just torn a door off its hinges. By the time authorities arrived, the room had been searched in the frantic, ignorant way of people trying to undo a nightmare. Drawers had been pulled open. The wardrobe had been checked. The bed frame had been examined like it might confess something. Official searches followed, careful, methodical, humiliating. Every corner was inspected. The window was tested. The lock was studied. The hallway outside was examined for tracks, for evidence that someone had stood there. Nothing. No cord. No rope. Nothing that could leave such a precise mark. An autopsy was performed. The mark was noted. The absence of a tool was noted. And still, the cause of death remained unclear in a way that made everyone involved feel foolish. Because death, in their world, was meant to have a method. It was meant to be traceable. This one wasn't. News spread as news always spreads when it carries the promise of a story. A young squire, young nobleman, found dead in a locked, supposedly haunted chamber. A hooded monk whispered about in the castle for hundreds of years. A legend that claimed the monk killed intruders by strangling them with a thin rope, and a corpse with the exact kind of mark a thin rope would make. The case moved into the public realm not only as tragedy, but as spectacle. In the telling, the quiet facts were sharpened into a mystery that demanded an answer. Murder, suicide, panic, prank gone wrong, or something else. In Upper Silesia, it reached the Assize court, and with it came the theater of certainty. Men in official roles compelled to stand in front of an unexplainable scene and declare what it meant. The very framing invited extremes. Newspapers were eager to hang words like ghost on the event because ghost is a tidy container for fear. It allows readers to feel dread without having to accept that the real world can be this cruel and strange. It became in the press the hooded monk mystery, a killed by ghost theory. Talk of scientists and psychic specialists being called in, people whose job in public imagination is to drag meaning out of darkness. But in the castle itself, among the men who had been there, the moral shape of it never needed psychics, because they remembered the beginning too clearly. They remembered the spill of drinks and the laughter that followed. They remembered how easily the group mood turned Anton's hesitation into weakness. They remembered the way the new man had said, "Prove it," with the careless confidence of someone who didn't have to bear the consequences. They remembered, most of all, that Anton had locked the door himself. That detail sank into them over time, becoming heavier each year. A locked door is supposed to protect. A locked door is supposed to mean safety, privacy, control. In this case, the lock had been the trap. Some of the men tried to save themselves in memory. They told the story later as if they had been concerned, as if they had tried to dissuade him. But the castle remembered differently. The corridor remembered their laughter. The lock remembered the click. When the official questions ended, when files were closed without comfort, when the castle passed into quieter hands, the story persisted the way these stories do, not because it was proven, but because it had the perfect shape. Pride, dare, locked door, scream, mark, no rope. A legend with teeth. Years later, one of the friends, older, sobered by the ordinary catastrophes of life, returned to Zustadt Castle. He told himself it was nostalgia. He told himself he wanted to see it in daylight to make the old fear look childish. He walked the second-floor hallway alone. The door to the room had been repaired, new hinges, a newer lock, but the seam of dust at the bottom was back, as if the place insisted on sealing itself. He stood before it and listened, not because he believed in monks, but because he needed something, anything, that would let him file that night away as a clear, simple thing. At first he heard nothing. Then, softly from behind the wood, came a long, deliberate creak, like weight shifting across an old floor. He stepped back, his stomach dropping, and realized what the truth had been all along, the unresolved residue that no court could remove. Even if there was no monk, even if there was no rope, They had still made a young man prove something to them. And when the scream came, it had been too late to take the dare back. Anton Holberg stayed dead. The mark around his throat stayed unaccounted for. The room stayed sealed. And the castle, like any old building that has watched enough human pride, kept its silence. Not as an answer, as a refusal. This was midnight horror society, dark curiosity for sleep. Until your next midnight session, sleep well.